In this video, I'm going to be going over what is a request for comments. So, request for comments. Let's crack her open. A request for comments, RFC, is an individually numbered publication in a series from one of a small group of bodies, most prominently the Internet Engineering Task Force, the principal technical development standard setting bodies for the Internet. What does that actually mean? So, a request for comments is a series of numbered documents that the ITF uses to document Internet standards, or what they call Internet standards. An RFC documents and puts into writing what already works, not what someone thinks will work. What do I mean by that? Why were RFCs first made? The RFC system was invented by Steve Crocker in 1969 to help record unofficial notes of the development of ARPANET. ARPANET was, we'll go into that another time. Why do RFCs exist? To document standards that already exist and work, right? But what does that mean by standards? Why do RFCs only document standards that exist and work? RFCs weren't designed to document what might work, but what already works and works well out in the real internet. So for a protocol to become an RFC, it must already be used in the internet and be being used in the real world before it becomes an RFC. This is called rough consensus and running code in order to battlefield test it. First, you must deploy whatever you want to be a standard, then it becomes an RFC. RFCs are used to document the good ideas of the internet for the benefit of the internet community at large. Are there other standards bodies that work differently? Yes, there are other standards bodies that work in the hypothetical and try to create standards before that standard has ever been tested in the real world to see if it actually works, which is a terrible approach because then you're documenting things that never existed in a meaningful way in the first place. How does an RFC get made? An RFC gets made usually by teams of experienced engineers that work for a major internet-based company that do something to develop some technical thing. How does an RFC get published? RFCs get published three fundamental ways: through a working group, through an individual submission, and through independent submissions track. What is the process for an RFC? The first thing you have to do to get an RFC published is to publish your ideas in an internet draft. After it is an internet draft, then it can have a chance to be published as an RFC. Can there be joke RFCs? There are a few joke RFCs, such as IP over AV and carriers. So, not every RFC that gets posted is serious, right? Okay. This RFC right here is a standard for the transmission of IP datagrams on AV and carriers, right? This is called IP over AV and carriers. It was a famous experiment. Okay, IP over AV and carriers. Wow, look at that. Yeah, so it was a proposal to carry internet protocol traffic by birds such as homing pigeons, yada yada yada. It's pretty much a joke, right? It was used kind of as an experiment and mostly as a joke. And then there's hypertext coffee pot control protocol. I honestly don't have much of an idea what this is, but it's another joke RFC. So not every RFC is 100% serious. Are RFCs de facto standards, right? Some can become de facto standards, right? Some protocols, some RFCs do become literal standards and de facto protocols, right? Is a custom or convention that has achieved dominant. A de facto standard is a custom or convention that has achieved dominant position by public acceptance or market forces. For example, early entrance to the market. De facto is a Latin phrase that means in fact, literally by or from fact. So, in conclusion, what is an RFC? So, an RFC is a document made for documentation that is publicly available. Sometimes it's written by an individual, sometimes it's written by a group, sometimes it becomes a de facto standard. Sometimes it's adopted, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's informational, sometimes it's experimental, sometimes it's ignored. RFCs are not required by law, they're not backed up with civil or criminal penalties, and they're not required to be adopted. So, in conclusion, an RFC isn't a standard in any way. What an RFC actually is a series. It's a list of publicly viewable documents published by the IETF that exists and serve as the means of documenting and disseminating the best technical practices for the internet. At the end of the day, the RFCs aren't actually standards. They are best practices. And RFCs are just the means of documenting the best practices that people believe should be standards but aren't actually required standards. Right? So at the end of the day, what is an RFC? An RFC is a document that is published by the IETF that exists to document what some people or certain people or the most experienced and technical people for the internet, what these people believe to be the best practices for the internet. And why do people make these RFCs, right? So they document them for historical purposes, but they also document them because they share it in a community where it's very easily and fastly disseminated, right? So if you come up with something that is, if you're an internet technical engineer, and you and your team come up with something that is really good, or they believe is really great, right? And you believe that if the rest of the internet adopted your technical protocol, right, your idea, the internet in a whole would work much better. Well, how do you disseminate? How do you spread that information to the right people? Well, you use the IETF. You publish it as an RFC in the IETF, and you get it in front, and you're going to be able to disseminate it to the right people that will be able to implement it in the right way to help the internet. So that's what an RFC is.